Time has a profound impact on all of us. We all eventually run out of time. Time has an impact on venture funds also. That's what we're going to talk about next.
What's a zombie fund?
So most venture capital firms raise a new fund every 3 to 5 years. When a firm hasn't raised a new fund for 7 years or 8 years or 9 years, it becomes a zombie, right? It's like The Walking Dead. You can't quite make it go away. So remember that VC funds tend to last 10 years or more. If it's an early stage fund that invests in companies and has made investments in year 4 and year 5, it might still have companies in year 12 or 13 that are still maturing. So even if a fund isn't able to make new investments, it might still be around managing its existing investments. And this is the phenomena of zombie funds. The fund that is still around and still has active investments and might still have partners managing it, but isn't in a position to make new investments. In 1997 to 2000, maybe 2001, there were a lot of new firms created. And many of these new firms by 2003, 2004 were not going to be successful. And by 2005, some of these firms started struggling. And when I say they struggled, they didn't necessarily struggle as funds. So some of their funds might have done okay. But as a firm, the overall firm wasn't holding together for one reason or another. And likely the funds that they raised in 2000 or 2001 weren't performing very well. What we started seeing in 2006, 2007, 2008 were some of these firms deciding to essentially stop working together and trying to raise another fund. And effectively, they went out of business even though they're still around managing their existing investments, and hence the label zombie fund.
All right, so if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm working hard to work my network to get introductions, presumably zombie funds are not the ones I want to be focused on. First of all, is that true?
Well, a zombie fund is not going to be able to make an investment in your firm. So if you're looking for a new investor, that fund is not going to be helpful. But those funds often can make investments in companies that they're already investors in. So they can do follow-on investments in their existing companies that they've invested in. And I'll give an example of that from my own experience. The previous firm that I was part of with my partners was Mobius Venture Capital. And we had raised 3 funds, one in 1997, one in 1999, and one in 2000. By 2006, as a firm, the partners at Mobius decided not to raise another fund together. So Mobius became a zombie fund, or zombie firm. However, those funds were still very active, and there were still partners, myself, Jason, Seth, and Ryan included, who actively managed the funds of Mobius Venture Capital. And we still manage them to this day. In fact, we just had a company in Boulder go public earlier in 2013, a company called Rally Software that we'd invested in 2004. So a zombie fund can continue to be actively involved in its existing portfolio companies and can continue to provide capital for its existing portfolio companies, but it can't make new investments. Now, one of the odd things that you run into is a lot of times VC firms, when they get into that 6th or 7th year where they haven't raised another fund, but they haven't decided to stop trying to raise that next fund, pretend like they're still in business, pretend like they're still in a position where they can make new investments. So they'll take meetings with entrepreneurs. They'll talk about how they have 1 or 2 more investments left to make out of their fund, when in fact they probably don't have any. Those are low probability events from an entrepreneur's perspective in terms of fundraising. And there's actually quite a bit of bad behavior as those VC firms just try to stay in the market rather than acknowledge that they're out of the market until they get that next fund raised.
So if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm talking to a VC firm, how would I sort of spot the zombie, right? So if they're out there trying to be in the market, how would I know if they're real or not?
Well, their chinos are threadbare and their blue shirts are like a little faded and maybe have some stains on them. The zombie firms generally, it's easy to identify, especially today, because it's so easy to look up on the web, whether you're using Crunchbase or something else, to see the last investment somebody made. And so the first thing you should do is use your network and use the information available to you to see the last time an investment was made. If somebody's made an investment within the last 6 months or 12 months, they're probably active. If it's been 3 years since that firm made an investment, they're probably not active. Second is check your network. Try to find people that they've worked with. Try to figure out what's going on. And don't be bashful about asking them, what are some of the recent investments that you've made? Well, in 2009, we made an investment in such and such. That should be a big red flag that you're not going to have a high probability of that person moving quickly to make an investment in you.
So let's say I've gotten an investment from a firm, it looked good at the time, and now they've turned into a zombie firm. Should I be worried as an entrepreneur about this firm and their ability to support me?
It varies a lot. And this is a case where it's really in your interest to be direct and clear with that VC firm to understand what they can and can't do. Asking them questions about what their behavior going forward is going to be like is important. If they have a seat on your board, understanding whether or not that person can be a board member for a long period of time, or if they're just looking for their next gig and the second they get a new job, they're going to leave your board. Understanding whether they have any reserves that they have available to you going forward. How much of their fund is available for your company or for other companies in the portfolio to invest in? Oftentimes when venture firms become zombie firms, it's a slow process to them going out of business, right? They're still sort of around, hence the zombie language. But you start to see partners peeling off as they're going off to do the next thing in their life. And that's important to understand, especially if your partner is one of those that peels off. So being more direct and understanding what they can and can't do is a useful thing at that moment in time.
Questions?
Go ahead.
You talked about the zombies who might take meetings anyway. And is that just a matter of ego? Like what, or is there some nefarious way they could take advantage of entrepreneurs, or is it just they just kind of want to keep talking the talk?
I think it's probably a combination of fundamental denial, right? This disbelief that this wouldn't be an activity that was useful. And then VCs take meetings. That's what they do. They take new meetings to look for new things. And you want to stay in the flow of what's happening. And the way to stay in the flow of what's happening is to be relevant and to meet with entrepreneurs. At least that's what these VCs are telling themselves, versus recognize that there's really only two things they should be focused on at that moment in time. One is working hard for their existing portfolio companies to try to generate returns, and the other is to be working to figure out how to raise the next money, a fund, so that they can continue to invest in companies. So taking those meetings and staying in the flow is not that important. Now there's an exception, and the exception is the VC who's part of a firm that's thinking about creating a new firm but has accepted that his old firm isn't able to make investments. Some of those VCs will make angel investments. And again, I can talk from personal experience. Between 2006 and 2007, after we decided Mobius wasn't going to make any new investments, but before Foundry Group raised its fund in 2007, I made 30 or so angel investments with my own money. And some of my partners made angel investments with their money as well. So we stayed in the flow, not by writing venture-sized checks, but by writing $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 type checks as an angel investor. So I don't think it's nefarious. I think it's often much more an issue of denying reality and trying to pretend like the person's still relevant even when they're not. Go ahead, Eugene, you had a question.
Why is 10 years the standard time horizon for a venture fund?
10 years is the standard time horizon because it's the 11th commandment that God handed down to Moses all those years ago. Oh yeah, it's the Bank Holding Act. There's this thing called the Bank Holding Act that actually limited funds to be 10 years. But interestingly, there were some ways around it. So you can automatically extend these funds year by year after that. And you'll often see venture funds in year 17, year 18, year 19, still holding on to a couple of portfolio companies as they work to get them to liquidity event.